Happy Father's Day, and welcome everybody to today's live stream of the Westlake Village Symphony. We're so glad you can be with us and so grateful to have kept this audience of all of you throughout these tough times. As you know, there's no symphony orchestra in the world that can survive without government subsidies or donor support. We are very fortunate to have been supported for several years by very many special people. First, I'd like to give a great shout out to John Lockhart. John has helped us immensely put together not only this concert online, which is the broadcast of our May 23rd concert, but has been supportive of us in many ways for a very long period of time now. We'd like to make a very special thank you to Vic and Carolyn Deirmendjian, who have made our May 23rd concert possible with a big donation. Thanks to Don and Betsy Robertson and Ellis Patterson, sponsors of the technology assistance that brought this online broadcast to you, our audience. I'd like to give a very special thanks to Westminster Presbyterian Church for hosting this concert on the afternoon of May 23rd. And on a personal note, thank you to Westminster Presbyterian. I am class of 1978. In their lovely courtyard and patio, we brought you this concert. The audience loved it and told us we should do more concerts there in the future. Finally, many thanks to you, our audience and supporters. We hope to resume public concerts in the Conejo Valley during the fall and winter of 2021. And we hope you will join us for the live music. As you know, there's nothing like live music. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our new artistic and music director, Mr. Mike Stanley, and who has been so generous with his time conducting this concert for us. So again, Mr. Mike Stanley, please enjoy the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for that introduction and for thanking all those sponsors. We really do appreciate them. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you guys. So my name is Michael Stanley. I'll be your MC for the day, and I'm really honored to be the new artistic and music director of the Westlake Village Symphony. Just a little bit about myself. I may be new to this position in Westlake Village Symphony, but I'm not new to the Conejo Valley area. I actually grew up in Thousand Oaks. I graduated from Thousand Oaks High. And right after I graduated high school, I began conducting groups in the area. I conducted for the Young Artists Ensemble Teen Summer Musical. I conducted musicals at Conejo Players Theater and also my own wind ensemble. And so I've actually known some of the musicians in this orchestra since that time, many years ago. So it's really wonderful to be back and working with this group of musicians. The concert you're about to see was, as Ryan mentioned, performed live on the afternoon of Sunday, May 23rd in the courtyard at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And we had a really great time putting this concert on. The audience was very enthusiastic. In fact, I would say they were at least as excited to be attending a live performance as we were to be putting one on. And the weather turned out in our favor to be really lovely, and it was a great afternoon of music making. So we're really pleased that we can share this with so many of you in the community by having this online broadcast. So thank you, John, for making this happen. I just want to talk a little bit about each piece before we listen to it, and then we'll bring in some guests to talk about the music from their perspective. So the first piece on the program is a piece by the English composer Gustav Holst. And although he is known as an English composer, I was interested to find out that Holst actually came from a long line of musicians that date all the way back to his great-grandfather, who was a composer and music instructor to the Imperial Russian court in St. Petersburg in the late 1700s. And then his family emigrated to England in the early 1800s, where he was born in 1874. So since he was from a musical family, his training in music began with piano lessons from his father, followed by the violin, and then finally he settled on the trombone, which, believe it or not, he started the trombone as a potential cure for his asthma. He also began composing in his early teens, and he later studied at the Royal College of Music under the well-known composition teacher Charles Villiers Stanford, who also taught Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, who is our second composer for today. After he left the Royal College, he spent 5 years working as a professional trombonist, including playing in what is now the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. But in 1903, he decided to give up his orchestral playing career and focus on teaching and composing. It was soon thereafter that he got appointed to be the new head of music at that time new, St. Paul's School for Girls outside London, and he would actually remain teaching there for the rest of his life. In 1912, the school opened a new music wing with a soundproof classroom for Holst, and he was really thrilled with this. And he took the opportunity to go in there on his off time to compose in the soundproof room because it helped him concentrate. And the St. Paul Suite actually happens to be the first piece that he wrote in that new classroom. So he dedicated it to the school and their orchestra as an expression of gratitude for this wonderful new music facility. Today, you probably know Holst as the composer of the large orchestral suite, The Planets. However, St. Paul's Suite is one of his earlier compositions that was an important step in his development as a composer. It has 4 straightforward movements, some of which begin to already show the characteristics of his mature composing style. For example, the outer movements are based on British folk music, which is something he was really interested in, and the inner movements show his interest in music of the Far East and his love of using clever compositional devices in his works. We're going to start with just the first movement of the St. Paul Suite, and this movement is titled Jig. As you know, a jig is a lively folk dance, and usually a dance it's a dance that has 2 beats to the measure, like 1, 2, 1, 2. However, one of the things that Holst likes to do is play with your listener expectations. So he starts throwing in groups of 3 beats instead of 2, making it from duple to triple meter, which really makes it more sophisticated than just a simple folk dance. You'll hear 2 main themes or musical motives. The first one is introduced right at the beginning by the first violins, and they play very strong and loud. And then a short time later, the second violins will softly introduce the second theme. And then from there, Holst will develop those 2 themes throughout the rest of the movement. He develops them in many imaginative ways, as you will hear. So now we hope you enjoy the first movement of Gustav Holst's St. Paul Suite. All right. We're going to go on to the second movement now. And the second movement is titled Ostinato. And an ostinato in musical terms refers to a repeated pattern of notes and rhythms. So what Holst does is he builds the entire movement around a short little ostinato that's introduced right at the beginning. You'll hear it introduced softly in the second violins. It's a two-measure figure, and it basically just goes up and down the first three notes of a major scale. Dee-da-da-da, 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 dee-da-da, that's all it is. But if you listen carefully through the whole movement, you'll hear that it never, ever disappears, no matter whether he changes to different meters or changes it to a different instrument or any other variations. He manages to keep that little motif ostinato going throughout the entire movement. So listen for that as you're listening to the piece. Then after the ostinato is established, you'll hear a beautiful little violin solo by our concertmaster, Dianne Rammon, who is going to be joining us soon. And she brings in that little solo over top, and then he begins to develop all of the music. It's kind of a waltz-like piece. Another thing that he uses in this is ascending and descending scales. So you'll hear like the bass going dun, 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 going up and down scales. And it all just kind of ties everything together. He also makes use of a clever musical device known as hemiola. Now, as strange as that word may sound, it actually just refers to something called a polyrhythm. And a hemiola means you put groups of 2 and 3 beats on top of each other, where beat 1 is always the same, but there's somebody playing groups of 2 and somebody playing groups of 3, and they kind of clash against each other. He uses that technique as well. And overall, it's a challenging movement to play, but it sounds very light and playful when you listen to it. So we hope you enjoy the second movement, Ostinato. All right, we hope you enjoyed that. And now that you heard that beautiful violin solo, I'd like you to meet the person who made that beautiful sound, and that would be our concertmaster, Mrs. Dianne Ramone. Dianne, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Nice
You too.
know that the product of our effort is so beautifully displayed and heard and recorded, and I'm just delighted.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to hear you play. I wondered if you could talk to the audience for a minute about your role as a concertmaster. What kinds of job does that entail, and why is a concertmaster so important to the functioning of the orchestra?
Well, actually, the concertmaster, I believe, is to simply display or relay the wishes of the conductor, I would say, firsthand. If there's a change in dynamic or a change in bowing or a change in phrasing, that is generally the role of a concertmaster to implement and to mark the parts with appropriate bowings, which of course, if the conductor wishes, can be changed at any time. But that would be one big role, I would say. Yes, basically for your instructions.
Right. And in some ways, you're almost like the assistant conductor, because before conductors became standard in the 1800s, the concertmaster actually used to be oftentimes the leader of the orchestra, and they would lead, in Baroque music, they would lead from their chair and just start and stop with their bow, and the whole orchestra would follow them. So it stands to reason that you would then continue to be a leader in the orchestra.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is usually accepted that the second violin a concertmaster, the viola concertmaster, and the cello concertmaster would be in tune with the concertmaster of the orchestra to basically be a chamber orchestra of 4 or 5 players enlarged by however many people to play in that sort of manner. Yeah, together.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think when the orchestra plays together as chamber music and all the principal players, you're following each other, and then the orchestra is following you, it just makes the music so much more organic because everybody's really listening and following along in real time. So I agree with you 100%. I wondered if you could now talk about the solos that you have in the third movement coming up. These were very more extensive, and I think they had a lot more depth to them in terms of the emotional content. Was there anything in particular that you liked or brought out about the solos in the intermezzo?
No, I wouldn't say anything in particular. It's like you say, a bit more heavy, more emotional than the first little solo, da 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 da, sort of whimsical.
Yeah,
is a little bit more intense, and the solos are very high for the violin. A lot of this Holst knew how to use the violin well, I think, and when played well, I hope are effective with the rest of the orchestra. And I think that not only you but the orchestra did a lovely job of complementing a solo instrument playing, whether it's either the principal viola or John Fair, the principal cellist, or the concertmaster. Yes, and that's in your ballpark, I would say. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we definitely tried to accompany you so that you'd be free to play artistically like you want. So everybody, the next movement it's called Intermezzo, which just means interlude, and it features. It begins with very soft pizzicato strings, meaning plucked, and then you'll hear Diane come in with a beautiful solo, and she'll then be augmented by the rest of the section, and it goes back to a solo. This movement, you really hear Holst's fascination with music of the Far East and of the Middle East. You'll hear the harmonic minor scale, which is a characteristic of frequently associated with Arabic music. And he was so into non-Western languages and music and religions. He actually studied Sanskrit so that he could read Indian religious texts in their original language. So he was really into it, and you'll hear that in this movement. And the other interesting thing about this movement is that he juxtaposes some really very different kinds of music. So you'll hear that opening section, which comes back again, but in between the slow music, he puts in this little 2/4 thing that sounds more like a barn dance than anything else. It's very, very different, and yet somehow it really works. So that's a neat contrast that you can listen for. So we hope that you enjoy this intermezzo movement of the St. Paul Suite. Beautiful job, Diane. Beautiful.
Thank you, Michael.
I really enjoyed hearing that again. I wondered if you could just talk for a moment about how you became involved with the orchestra and, you know, what you enjoy about playing with the Westlake Village Symphony.
Well, it goes back a few years when I was hired every once in a while to help out with the orchestra. It had a very different composite of individuals. It started off, I think, connected with Amgen, and both my husband Philip and I helped out with the orchestra, which was a lot of fun. Very nice people. There is a sort of a remnant of people left over from that orchestra, but it has developed under previous conductors to be the orchestra that it is now. And I think that the group of musicians that are together together to form the Westlake Symphony are just outstanding. A lot of souls have completely different jobs and come and play because they enjoy playing music. And it certainly has been a very exciting few months with you coming out of the pandemic and risking trying to be together. That is, if you consider being together with the person on your stand 6 feet away under difficult circumstances, I would say. And we rehearsed at first outdoors, which was interesting as well until it got quite cold. But Michael has brought everyone together. I just enjoy not only the camaraderie, but the music and the people. And both Philip and I are just very honored to be in the Westlake Village Symphony. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, Diane. Yeah, I agree with you. Being relatively new to the orchestra, it felt like a family to me almost immediately, and I felt very welcomed. And there are so many wonderful people in the orchestra that just really enjoy playing together and making music together. I found it very easy to come in and work with all of you guys and try to bring it all together. It's been a great experience for myself as well. So.
We have a wonderful group, a wonderful board, and a wonderful group of core individuals like Ryan Gold and Martha Farwell, who work just to the nth degree to make the orchestra happen. And we're very, very grateful for that.
Absolutely. They do a lot of hard work behind the scenes to make everything smooth for us in rehearsal, and we really appreciate that. I'm going to introduce the last movement now, and the last movement is very interesting. It's called Dargason, and one interesting thing about it is that it's actually almost a note-for-note transcription that Holst made of the last movement of his second suite in F for military band. So myself, being a French horn player, I first learned this music playing it in band, and then later came to this string orchestra version. So it's very interesting to hear what he did as far as changing the orchestration from band to orchestra. And sort of the defining characteristic of this movement is his ability to layer two different themes on top of each other. So you're going to hear the opening theme played softly in the beginning by the first violins and then brought into the rest of the orchestra. But then partway through, he has the lower strings begin to play the tune, the traditional tune Greensleeves. And he layers then the Greensleeves over top of the other theme. And it's another example of hemiola because the Greensleeves is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, whereas the underlying part is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the two rhythms are different, but yet they fit together really nicely. And it happens twice in the piece where he brings those two together. And it just creates a really magical effect, especially the fact that he's able to do it amongst the different meters. The last thing I want to point out is the little solos that Diane and our principal bass, Jeff, have at the very, very end. He takes that opening theme and he splits it up measure by measure and tosses it back and forth between the first violin and the string bass. In the band version, it's a piccolo and a tuba, which may be a little more comical, musically speaking. But I think that Jeff and Diane did a wonderful job of bringing out the sort of humorous characteristics of that closing. So when you get to the very end, listen for how the melody is split between the high and the low instruments and what an effect that has. So we're going to listen to now the final movement, Dargason from St. Paul's Suite. All right. We really hope you enjoyed that first piece, the St. Paul Suite by Gustav Holst. We're now going to switch to a very different style of piece, but one that comes from a similar time period. Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, who was in some ways named after the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, is a composer from a group of underrepresented composers that is now beginning to get more play. He was English and he was Black. His father was a doctor from Sierra Leone in Africa, and his mother was an Englishwoman, and he was born there in England. And then his father moved back to Africa, and he was raised by his mother's family. In that family, there was also a tradition of music, so he began his musical studies with the piano and at home from his grandfather, and then the violin. And then he went on to study at the Royal College of Music. Actually, one interesting thing I found out is he was actually at the Royal College at the same time as Gustav Holst. But he's not a composer that you've heard of, and Holst you have. So I think it's really important that we're bringing forward this piece because it's such a wonderful piece of music. In fact, when my 7-year-old son attended the concert, and when I asked him what his favorite piece was, he named this as his most favorite piece, which I thought was really amazing that it was able to reach a 7-year-old and hold his interest. Before we listen to that music, though, I do want to bring in our next guest, and that would be the distinguished composer, conductor, and violist, Mr. Barry Brisk, who I've known for many years. And Barry has a wide range of experience that I think will be able to shed some light on a few aspects of this. Hi, Barry.
Hi, Mike.
How are you today?
Doing rather well.
Oh, good. I was just telling them about all of your experience as a composer and a conductor. I wondered if you could talk for a minute. Barry's recently retired as the conductor of the Beach City Symphony, where he was for many years. If you could just talk about the workings of a community orchestra and how that might be different from a professional orchestra.
Well, a professional orchestra, of course, gets paid. That's how they earn their living. So it's a different approach. A community orchestra really exists to give an opportunity to local musicians, non-professionals, to give them the opportunity to come together and play as an ensemble, which if these didn't exist, people would just simply practice in their bedrooms and that would be it. But so this gives you an opportunity. Now, musicians are very goal-oriented. We all practice so that we can learn something, but then we want to do something with that. So we practice, and then we come together with the orchestra and we give concerts. We're not getting paid for this, or I should say the musicians in general are not getting paid for this, but we do it for the love of it. The love is the love of playing your instrument, whether it's a tuba or a piccolo or a viola, the love of the music, the love of your colleagues there, getting to see them all every Wednesday evening for 6 or 7 Wednesdays before the concert, bringing your family to the concert. It's a quite different experience from the professional one, where they'll have perhaps 3 rehearsals in a week, give a concert on Saturday night, go home, and that's the end of it. That's a wonderful experience, and it's at a very high level musically, but it's a quite different thing from what we get at the community orchestra level.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And I think one of the things I enjoy about the community orchestra is the love of your fellow colleagues in the orchestra and how that really brings people together. And the fact that we rehearse for a longer period of time gives us more time to work together on the music. So I think that those are you're absolutely right. Those are some of the best aspects of a community orchestra. It's not professional, but everyone in it is doing it for the love of playing. I think that's really an excellent thing that we have going in the Westlake Village Symphony. Now, I wondered if you could just talk for a minute about composing. You know, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor is not a well-known composer, but he was a very fine composer. And you yourself are a composer, and you've had many pieces premiered. What could you maybe say about that experience of having one of your pieces premiered by an orchestra?
Well, it's always very interesting because normally when that happens, I happen to also be the conductor. So you're there and you're putting it together, but it's a little bit different because you're not trying to get it the way Beethoven would have wanted it. You're trying to get it the way you would have wanted it. And the things you ask the orchestra to do are perhaps a little bit different. And once in a while, you even ask other people's opinions as to how they think this is working. Maybe somebody has a suggestion to make it a little bit more effective. So it's a slightly different thing. And of course, you're not trying to help Tchaikovsky's music and his emotions come to the fore. You're taking care of your own music and emotions. So it's on a slightly different plane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to mention that you have written a flute concerto for our principal flute, Rhonda Dayton, who will be on the show next week with us. And that the Westlake Village Symphony is going to be giving the premiere of that sometime in the near future. And we're really looking forward to doing that.
Right. Well, I've worked with Rhonda for many years. I was the music director of the Beach Cities Symphony, which is down in Torrance, for 25 years, which meant I conducted 100 concerts there. And for at least 15 of those years, Rhonda was the principal flute player. So we've gotten to know each other very well. So I had the idea of writing a concerto for her. It's in the standard 3 movements of a fast movement, a slow movement, and then ending with a fast movement. But the little quirk to it is that in the second movement, she will be playing an alto flute, which is lower in range than the standard C flute and has the most gorgeous sound. So when you write for an alto flute, you're writing for tone quality and beauty. You're not writing so much for technical exuberance. The other thing is her husband, Ken, is a fine percussionist. And so in that movement, I wrote a very important part for the vibraphone. So they have a duet between alto flute and vibraphone, featuring the family there.
That sounds wonderful, Barry. I'm really looking forward to seeing that score and doing the premiere. So thank you so much for talking about that piece with us. So I just want to introduce the Coleridge-Taylor piece that we're going to play is Novalette number 3 from a set called For Novaletten. It's not a very well-known piece, and it's written for an unusual combination of string orchestra and percussion. Just how you were mentioning the use of percussion there in your second movement. Coleridge-Taylor brings in some light percussion in this movement, but it adds quite a lot to the strings when he does that. So in the piece, you're going to hear it open with a very soft pizzicato strings, and then you'll hear Diane again, and she plays the primary theme in the beginning. And then you're going to hear the music go through. You'll hear a couple of different themes, and he builds it up, and then he gets to a section marked piamoso, which means faster, essentially. And so he does a piamoso section, and then it comes back down, and he restarts as if from the beginning in a way, and he builds back up to another piamoso. But one interesting thing that he does here is he doesn't repeat that earlier piamoso in the same key. He brings the music back, but one step higher. So he changes the key, which changes the difficulty level for the orchestra because they have to learn the same music in a different key. And then after that peaks, he comes back down, and then the coda ends very softly and beautifully with, again, some pizzicato strings and very high note. You're going to hear, in the piamoso sections, you're going to hear tambourine, and you're also going to hear some triangle. And those are the percussion instruments that he included. And I just wanted to mention that Coleridge-Taylor, as a conductor of his own music, he toured America 3 times in the early 1900s. He was very well received and quite well known at that time. He did a lot of music. He wrote in the style of one of his idols, who was Dvorak, using folk songs and other themes like that. And when he went through New York, the musicians dubbed him the Black Mahler. They were very impressed with him as a conductor. And one of his missions in life, he said, was to help establish the dignity of the black man. And sadly, he died of pneumonia at a very young age of 37. But we're just now beginning to really discover so much of his music and enjoy it and appreciate it. So with that, I want to introduce to you Novalette number 3 by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. Nice job, everyone. I really enjoyed hearing that again. So now I want to just leave you all with a little teaser of part 2 of this concert, which will be next Sunday at the same time at 4 o'clock. Because the next piece on the program is a concerto for 2 violins and cello by Vivaldi. And we had 3 soloists. We had our principal cellist, John Fair, who was not able to be with us today, but hopefully next week. And the other 2 violin soloists were, again, Diane Ramone as our concertmaster and Carrie Salaya. And I'd like to bring Carrie in right now, and Diane, if possible, and just talk to you both about your experience of playing the solos. It was great to work with you. Carrie, let's start with you. How was that experience of playing the solo in the Vivaldi?
Well, first of all, I felt very honored that I was asked to play the duet part with Diane. So that was really fun. And I love Baroque music. It's challenging because it's like a completely different bowing than classically trained violinists usually learn. But it was really fun.
Great. And Diane, you had the other solo part. I thought it was great the way you two worked together, because he wrote a lot of things with the two violins sort of together against the cello solo.
Yes, right. And it seemed like the cello solo was truly a cello solo, where a lot of the two violin things were really written for a duet at the time. Both instruments playing together. There was one sort of a cadenza art little solo for the first violin, but the rest of the time, most of the violins were together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that was a great thing, the way the concerto was written. Instrumentation kind of became the standard for what's called the concerto grosso, which is gross meaning big, and those two violins and cello became sort of standard. So Carrie, can you maybe talk for a moment about the things that we did with our bows and our bowing to try to sort of emulate the Baroque style a little bit more with our modern instruments?
Sure. It's too bad I don't have my bow with me. I guess I can use a pencil.
Bring it next week.
Typically we're down here at the bottom of the bow at the frog, but Baroque style usually is a little bit higher. So it's like the fulcrum of the bow area, balancing. It totally changes everything. And, back in the Baroque days, which is like started in the 1600s, there were two kinds of styles. One was with the string or the bow hair was really tight, and one was with really loose. So you kind of have to just pick, but it's a different feeling of bowing for sure. And then to get Diane and I to play it together, and then with John, and then with all the strings behind us, the timing has to be impeccable too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Baroque bows were actually shorter than the modern bow. They weren't. So I know we spent a lot of time on the style of the bowing, but I really think it paid off in terms of this piece sounding really different from the others, which were in a later, more romantic style. They tended to play off the string a lot more. Mm-hmm. So when the audience hears this, they'll hear that there's more separation, more bounce, a lot more off the string.
Yeah.
And I think that really gives the piece its special style. Mm-hmm. And today we're just going to listen to the very opening, which is pretty much featuring the soloist. It begins with just Diane and Carrie playing a duet in which they trade back and forth. So as a listener, just listen for the fact that you'll hear Diane play something and then immediately Carrie will echo it back or imitate it. And they go back and forth like this for the entire little opening section. And then they hand it off to John, the cello soloist. And when he comes in, the other part of the orchestra comes in, at least the lower instruments and the harpsichord join in. Another feature of Baroque music is at that time they did not use pianos, they used what's called a harpsichord. And the harpsichord was sort of part of the bass section in a way. The harpsichord would fill out the chords above the bass notes. And you'll hear the harpsichord in the mix as well. And then John does a little solo, and then we're going to pause right there and leave you hanging so that next Sunday at 4 you'll come back and listen. We'll start with this again, and we'll go through all of the Vivaldi, and then we'll have a chance to talk more about it next week with the two of you and hopefully with John as well. So let's take a listen to about the first 1 minute of this piece. And right when it gets to that first pause, we're going to stop. That's it. So
Viva
how was
Life.
that experience to hear yourselves and see yourselves playing that duet?
Well, I always felt like Diane does first two notes, then I come in and it's off to the races. You don't stop.
Very much.
Mhm.
And
It was a really lovely afternoon. I just totally enjoyed playing it live, and it's great fun seeing it now, 3 weeks later. Great fun.
It's very fun.
yeah, so we'll pick up there next week and talk more about Vivaldi, and we'll get to hear the entire piece and then go on to the rest of the concert. So I really want to thank you both for being on the show today to talk about your experience of playing in the orchestra and playing the violin, particularly the solos there in the Vivaldi. Thank you so much for coming in.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you,
Thank you,
Michael.
Michael. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Barry. Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Ryan, for being here. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So yeah, that's where we're going to leave the performance right now. And then next week, we'll come back and talk more about Vivaldi. Vivaldi was actually a virtuoso violinist himself. So when I hear those violin solos, I sort of think of Vivaldi playing Diane's part and maybe one of his top students playing the second part next to him. And he was writing something that he himself might play, which I think gives it a certain quality of the experience. Like he really knew what it felt like to play that music. He didn't just write the notes, but he may have even improvised and composed on his violin for all we know, but he definitely writes very commandingly for the violin. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was a violinist himself. So anyway, I want to make sure we thank our sponsors again. We had Don and Betsy Robinson, the Deirmendjian family, and all of our sponsors for helping us, and John as well, for helping us put on these concerts and to do the online broadcast. We're very grateful for the support. And I want to thank again Ryan for being here as president of the board. And I'd like to thank Diane and Carrie and Barry for joining us to talk about the music. It's been a wonderful experience for me, and I'm really looking forward to next Sunday. So please join us again next Sunday at 4. We're going to conclude the concert, the Vivaldi, and then we're going to have a piece by Sibelius and end with a piece by Bartók that includes some of our wind and brass and percussion players. So you'll get to hear all of that next week. And with that, I think we're nearing the end of our program. Unless anyone has anything they want to add, we'll conclude here and we'll pick it up here next week. So thank you so much for joining us. Really